Hello, and welcome to the first session of RSM in Sydney's Business and Finance Symposium for 2020. Today's webinar, Riding the Waves from Disruption to Recovery, will be presented by Kim Seeling-Smith. My name is Phil Price, and I'll be your moderator this year as in previous years. As I mentioned above, this is the first session in our 2020 BFS Symposium. Previously, we've done this as a live event with opportunities for networking, but this year, obviously, we're forced into some changes. Thanks to those who have attended before and are joining us again, and welcome to those who are joining us for the first time. In pondering themes for the 2020 Business Finance Symposium, we were, of course, very aware of the events of the last 6 months, but wanted to present some ideas and thought leadership on the important issues to businesses now and in the future. In our own business, we are acutely aware of the importance of the direct interface between our staff at all levels, that interaction between our staff and our customers and clients. So how important are our staff then? It seems to me that they are very important. In fact, they are key to the whole customer experience. We are super happy today to have Kim on the session. Kim is a client of RSM and a long-term supporter of our leadership teams. Kim Seeling-Smith is the CEO of Ignite Global and a leading Now of Work expert. I'm impressed by the next bit. She is a regular commentator for the Today Show, Forbes, CNBC Online, the Australian Financial Review, the Sydney Morning Herald, and many other print and radio media outlets. Kim is also the author of a book, Mind Reading for Managers, a book which used to sit in my own bookcase, but has been pilfered by somebody which talks about its value. The book focuses on 5 focused conversations for greater employee engagement and productivity, and has been recognised by Richard Branson's 100% Human at Work initiative for the innovative yet practical work that Ignite Global does to help businesses solve the very complex challenges around the now at work. What will be covered today? Well, in this interactive session, Kim will discuss the dynamic phases towards recovery, with emphasis on commercial and workforce considerations and its impact on customer experience. We'd love you to be involved in the discussion, and as such, we encourage you to monitor the chat box located at the bottom of your screen, as we will post a couple of questions within the duration of this session. We will also launch a poll question in the middle of the presentation to get a sense of where you are in the current situation and environment. At the end of the presentation, we'll have some time for your questions. We kindly invite you to enter these in the Q&A box located at the bottom of your screen, and we will address as many of these as we can. However, it might be that we don't get the opportunity or time to answer all these questions, so we will collate these along with the the webinar recording and materials, and make them available post this webinar. Kim, it's lovely that you could join us to make this presentation for us, especially in the launch of this year's symposium. I imagine that you've been very busy over the last 6 months and prolific presenter of online materials.
Indeed, indeed I have. Hello and welcome everyone. Yes, I have been busy. I've been busy, luckily, with client work, which I cannot say for all of my colleagues, but also in working behind the scenes, working on the business instead of in the business, something that RSM has been helping me with, because as Phil said, I am a client. Yes, despite the accent, I live and work in beautiful Sydney, Australia. And Abby, could you stop sharing your screen, please? There we go. Excellent. Thank you. Yes, despite the accent, I live and work in beautiful Sydney, Australia. And as Phil said, I've had my own consulting firm since 2009, helping organizations like yours understand what they need to do to disrupt their old school people practices to be able to hire and retain the workforce of the future. I won't go through all of my street cred because Phil did an admirable job about talking about my commentary on the future of work and my involvement in Richard Branson's 100% Human at Work initiative, which I'm proud to be a founding member in Australia for that initiative. As Phil said, I now fashion myself as the now of work expert because the future of work came barreling in on us on Friday, the 13th of March, 2020, when COVID-19 really shook up our apple cart and turned our world upside down. Now, COVID-19 was the first disruption of this decade and will hopefully be the most significant. But the futurists, economists, and demographers amongst us will tell us that it certainly will not be the last of this decade. So I want to start with a question from you. And that question is, what kinds of disruption do you see between now and the year 2030? So just type in the chat box, what type of disruption do you see between now and 2030? And we'll be monitoring the chat box. And Abby, if you could read out the answers as they're coming in, that would be great. What kind of disruption do you think that we'll be facing in this next decade? What some are calling the decade of disruption. Abby, what kind of answers do we have coming in?
Some are, so we have technology.
Yes, absolutely, a big one.
AI disrupts professional practice business. Then we also have global trade wars, focuses on US and China.
Yes.
Increased work from home and reliance on conferencing.
Yes.
We also have China becoming the superpower, migration, trade wars, climate migration, move to digital.
Yeah, excellent. Excellent, excellent. Thank you for that. So yes, you guys are hitting the hot spots. Clearly, technology, automation, AI. I've read some studies recently that said that we are 5 years ahead in the implementation of automation and AI than where we thought that we would, because we've had to pivot. Many of your businesses have probably had to pivot. So technology is definitely going to impact the workforce. But not only that, we absolutely have some global issues coming to the forefront, some civil unrest, without a doubt, not just recently, not just with the Black Lives Matter, even before COVID, even before Black Lives Matter, there were a number of demonstrations. We remember the Hong Kong demonstration. That seems like forever ago, but it wasn't that long ago. But even right here in Australia, I know a very large engineering company that was demonstrated against every single Friday because of their involvement in the Adani mine, which I think that they have subsequently pulled out of. So this could affect our businesses. Clearly, climate change and the entire geopolitical environment, the rise of China, the trade wars, climate refugees. I'm a scuba diver. I see climate change every single time I get in the water. But that's not it. But wait, there's more. And the more is we also have very quickly changing consumer demand. Remember way back 2 years ago, you'd walk into any cafe on George Street or on Collins Street down in Melbourne, and you would be able to find a plastic straw. And shortly before COVID, when the cafes closed down, you would be hard pressed to find a plastic straw. So things are changing very, very rapidly, and COVID has accelerated this. Now, when COVID first hit, like I said, I was lucky enough. I actually had a fairly large consulting project with Cisco. And my Cisco client and I sort of joke about how I over-delivered on that project because I was so grateful to have meaningful work to do when so many of my colleagues just watched their businesses fall over. And there are different points in the waves from this disruption to recovery that businesses do fall over. So I, in my spare time, decided that that I wanted to become obsessed with this topic. How could I help my clients? How could I help the people in my circle understand what they need to do to not only survive, but thrive through the disruption that is COVID, as well as the subsequent disruptions that we will face in this decade? And when I began putting my own research along with my own experience, you know, I hate to tell you my age, but I've been in the workforce since shortly after Black Monday in 1987, that October day in 1987 when the stock market fell off a cliff. I was still living in the United States. I was in university, graduated from Ohio State shortly thereafter, and went to work as an accountant, which is pretty scary, as Phil will tell you, because I'm a terrible accountant. But I have lived through that recession. I have lived through the dot-com boom and subsequent bust. I have lived through the GFC, moved to Australia, started this business during the GFC, and now COVID. And what I know to be true is that there are some companies that will not survive. And even if you're surviving now, depending on what happens into the future, there are still some touch points that may spell danger. And I'll go through all those in a second. But what is it about the companies that not only survive, but thrive? How can we do what we need to do to make ourselves stronger? And when I started testing this theory that I was talking about, I went to my Brains Trust to get their feedback. And my friend Laura Staples, who's the Human Resources Director for Laminex, iconic Australian brand, said, "You're talking about anti-fragility." And I said, "I'm what?" I had never heard of anti-fragility. But of course, I'd heard of Nassim Taleb. He's most famous for writing the book, The Black Swan. And she quickly had me read Anti-Fragile. And I just love this quote. He says, "The fragile will break. The resilient will bounce back. But the anti-fragile, they will thrive and grow through volatility into something even stronger." And that became the cornerstone of this white paper that I wrote that you'll get a copy of, called How to Ride the Waves from Disruption to Recovery. My poster child for this is Cisco, funnily enough, and it has nothing to do with the consulting work that I was doing with them. I found them in the research that I was doing on anti-fragile companies. Now, Cisco, back during Black Monday, Cisco almost went under because they fired their very first CEO for some IP, trademark infringement. And they wanted to move out of the incubator with Stanford University that they had been in since inception. So they sold themselves to a private equity firm, Sequoia Capital. Sequoia Capital installed a new CEO and they started going gangbusters. So that setback, that disruption of having to fire the CEO, their founder, could have caused them to fall over, but it didn't. But then the dot-com boom came and Cisco's stock price just soared as a result of that. But then the dot-com boom bust happened and Cisco lost 80% of their market share within 18 months. But they managed to regain that again, and then the GFC. Well, Cisco took a setback during the GFC, but in 2011, they decided to embark on a program of continuous improvement and continuous reorganization. Now, reorganization, if you've been through any reorganizations, you know that that is a tough culture change. And that could have been enough to, again, knock Cisco over. But over the last 9 years, they have gone from strength to strength, to the point where last November, almost a year ago, they were rated the #1 employer in the world. They have been frequently #1 employer in various regions, but this last year, #1 employer in the world. So this is what I want to do today, is I want to help you adopt an anti-fragile mentality. I want to help you look out into your future to see what that next normal, that new normal looks like for you, and to be able to set yourselves up for that very important recovery. So let's unpack the model. The waves from disruption to recovery. As you can see, they are waves. This isn't a linear model. The waves are meant to look like waves. They ebb, they flow, they grow stronger, they go weaker until they finally diminish. But they can also restart, as we've seen in Melbourne with the recent lockdown. And woohoo, it looks like we're past that. Fingers crossed we stay past that. So I want to take a moment to unpack this model for you. so that you get a broader understanding of all of the waves from disruption to recovery. But then I'm going to spend some time really doing a deeper dive into the little known and talked about pre-recovery phase, because it's in pre-recovery, the things that we do in pre-recovery that set ourselves up for that anti-fragile recovery phase. So let's talk about the first two phases, security and survival. Immediately upon any disruption, the first thing that we do is we go into security. And the questions that we ask ourselves is, are we going to be safe? Is the business safe? Are our employees safe? Now, we know a few businesses fell over during the security phase. Virgin, for instance, went into receivership during that security phase. Several hospitality companies, many of my speaking and events buddies, they've lost their businesses. They're rebounding, most of them, but they've lost their businesses. It was a huge setback. But once we know that we're going to be safe, so back in COVID terms, back in March, once we got our employees working from home, we got that set up, then we started into survival phase. So as you can see, that security phase starts to diminish as the survival phase starts to grow, but they're happening simultaneously, and you can go back and forth between these. In the survival phase, we are asking ourselves this question: will our business survive until the recovery? And how can we keep our employees emotionally fit and productive? And they go hand in hand. I suspect, as many do, that after JobKeeper 1.0 ends this month, that there may be a few companies that find it tough to continue through the survival phase. Now, I'm a big proponent of what the government's done in Australia. I think that they have taken as good of measures as they possibly could. And I know many businesses that are still surviving as a result of that. But if we go into a second wave, if Melbourne goes into a third wave, are we going to be able to survive? So security and survival, again, are waves. They go hand in hand, but they ebb and flow. But then I want you to concentrate, look at the pre-recovery phase and the recovery phase. There's a purple line, and if you're looking at this on a small screen, you'll see that it's not a solid line, it's a dotted line. And that dotted line is actually surrounded by a serpentine. Now I had to tell my graphic designer what a serpentine was. But the serpentine, the snake that goes around that dotted line, is meant to signify the very fickle nature of the new normal. I'm not even calling it the new normal anymore. I'm calling it the next normal, because over the next decade, we're going to have new normal after new normal after new normal. So we need to look out into the future with our spyglass and say, what is that next normal? And this is one of the main keys of tracking your recovery in the pre-recovery phase. So I'll talk about pre-recovery just a little bit now, and then I'm going to do a deeper dive. Pre-recovery is what we need to do to set ourselves up for recovery. The reason being, so recovery is recovery. The economy is rebounding. Life is starting to get good again. But surprisingly, many businesses fall over during the recovery phase. Why is that? It's because they are caught short, because their competitors have done certain things in the pre-recovery phase to set themselves up better. So they start losing market share. They start losing supply chain, access to supply chain. They start losing top talent. So it's what we do in pre-recovery that will really inform recovery. So what I want to do now is I want to find out where you guys are at. So Abby, could you launch the poll? Which phase are you in? Are you in security, survival, pre-recovery, or recovery? Which phase are you in? And we'll leave this open for a few minutes. It's anonymous, so we will not be able to see who answers what. So you won't have your accountant on the line going, what do you mean you're in security? I thought we were going into pre-recovery. Not that you guys would do that, Phil. So we'll give you a few more minutes to answer that. Where do you, answer honestly, where do you see yourself now? I have a suspicion based on other presentations that I've done where the most people will be, but I could be surprised. So how are we looking, Abby? What percentage of people do we have now?
We have a lot of people, Kim, and the pre-recovery. I am going to end the poll and share the results with everyone.
Perfect. Excellent. So I'm going to look at my second. Yes, pre-recovery. Fantastic. Okay. Okay. So pre-recovery, and that's exactly where I thought that we would be. Here in Australia, we've done pretty well. Several of you in the recovery phase, that's good to see. Few in the security and survival phase. So I understand. I understand completely. So how do we need to set ourselves up during that pre-recovery phase? What is the difference between coming out weaker and coming out stronger? How do we become anti-fragile? There are actually 4 things that we need to do. First of all, we need to fix any cracks that are exposed at the immediate disruption. So what are those cracks? They could be business continuity plans. Hopefully, if you didn't have one, you have one now. Business continuity plans, site continuity plans. If you have a manufacturing company, you have equipped all of your employees to work from home. But there are other cracks that you might have seen and might have to start to deal with. I have had many, many companies tell me that they saw cracks in their employees that were just kind of skating along, flying under the radar, but really probably shouldn't be there because they weren't performing, or their behavior started to become toxic, went from on the verge to very toxic. So those are the cracks that could be exposed. Similarly, managers, the cracks in leadership capability. Good enough is not good enough. As Richard Branson says, hire the right people and the customers will take care of themselves. So we need to make sure that we fix any of those cracks. The next thing that we do is track that next normal. Make our best guess as to which trends are going to settle and which trends are going to be fickle, because this is the characteristic of this next normal, of the new normal, is the serpentine. The serpentine means that there are some trends that will come in and look like they will settle down and become permanent, and then surprise us and go away. So we need to again, keep our spyglass open, look for what's happening in that next normal. And then we need to be able to quickly course correct when we make the wrong decision, and we will. One of the key characteristics of leadership in this next decade is the ability to make decisions based on little or conflicting information. Key competency that we need to start hiring and promoting our managers for. And then finally, set ourselves up in that pre-recovery phase. So let's look at what we need to do in the pre-recovery phase, how we need to set ourselves up with a specific emphasis on the workforce. So the pre-recovery phase, we need to look at the next normal. And when deciding what the next normal is going to look like, we absolutely have to look at our customers. Not only who we have, I have many clients who are actually changing customer bases for a number of reasons. Either they did mostly export and that's not happening anymore, or their customers have decided to go elsewhere because of a disruption in supply chain. But also how we serve our customers. Customer experience is absolutely critical to coming out the other side, to being anti-fragile. We have to, in fact, I put a post on LinkedIn and I got some really interesting feedback on that, because I said good enough is not good enough. And I had some customer service experts challenging me, and they said good enough might be good enough if you meet or exceed all of your customer expectations. And I said, wow, I can't argue with that. I thought that that was a very, very valid point. We might need to look at the geographies that we operate in. We might need to look at the pricing that we operate from. I know in my events industry, our pricing is all over the shop. Some people are actually charging more than they charged for live events because they're getting better results. We have to think about this next normal and this new normal from a different paradigm, a different space. Supply chains, workflows, operational procedures, and of course, the workforce expectation, because that's the other disruption that we're going to be seeing over the next decade. The workforce is now empowered. Gone are the days when the workforce did what they were told without pushing back, without question. Those days are gone and they're never coming back. The workforce wants more from a job than a paycheck. They want to work for a company that they can back, for people that they trust. I'm going to unpack that a little bit more in a minute. So before I do that, I want to talk a little bit about some of these fickle trends. And I want to use two examples right now. And the first one is the job market. I have been polling my clients, people on LinkedIn, the people in my database. I've been talking to as many people here in Australia and overseas, but specifically here in Australia as I can, to put my finger on the pulse to find out what their experience of hiring talent is. And even though we have high unemployment, it's very disparate. So we've got people who are in hospitality, customer service roles. You can find people like that available because a lot of those businesses have been impacted. Try and find a software engineer or a traditional structure or civil engineer. It's even more difficult to hire people with those functions as well. So it depends on where you are and what you're looking for, but do not be, if you're in a function or in a organization that finds it easy to find people, if you are looking at the unemployment numbers saying it's going to be happy days for a while, that is one of those fickle trends, because Korn Ferry, just demographically, looking at the demographics of our workforce, especially with immigration reducing, we are going to have far more jobs than people to fill them by the year 2030. In fact, Korn Ferry last year said 2.2 million more jobs than people to fill them, if they have to use any kind of cognitive ability. On the flip side of that, those people that are currently in the routine, tactical, and predictable work, well, those jobs are being automated. So our challenge and our opportunity is to bring the people whose jobs are being automated along on the journey with us, to train them how to do these jobs that require more cognitive skill. And I'll tell you a little bit more about that here in a second. The second trend that is all over the shop right now is office space. When we first sent our people to work from home, there were a lot of news stories, and I was involved in some of them, that said working from home is the new way. 72 to 80% of employees want to continue to work from home or work from anywhere. And that is a trend that is set in stone, but that does not mean that they don't want to come into the office. We are tribal by nature. We want to be with our tribe. So initially, there were a lot of news stories that said, we're just going to cancel all our office space and we're going to allow people to work from home. Companies are still doing that. You probably know of Twitter or Google or some of the more famous companies that are saying, we're not even talking about coming back to the office until 2021, maybe. But what we're seeing here in Australia is we're actually seeing office space shift to a hub and spoke model. And the AFR has said that Australia is actually moving from being able to recruit from a 25-kilometer radius from their office to a 250-kilometer radius from their office. So what we're looking at is more of a hybrid workspace. So these are trends that we need to consistently keep our spyglass on. What's happening with these trends? Okay, now I want to do a deeper dive into the pre-recovery phase. Now that we're tracking this new normal or this next normal, what do we need to do? What questions do we need to ask ourselves? Well, I think that there are two fundamental questions. The first is, what does that new normal or next normal look like? What do we need to do differently to serve our customers, to secure our supply chain for the next sub-shock? What do we need to do to protect our employees from any subshocks that may occur down the line. So that's the commercial question that we need to ask ourselves, but there is a workforce question as well. And that is the heart of what I want to leave you with today is the workforce considerations. What kind of workforce do we need? Good enough is not good enough. We need to be able to attract and retain the best talent we can possibly attract and retain in order for us to be able to identify those opportunities that come from this disruption and overcome the challenges. And customer service, CX, is paramount among them. We need to offer a great customer experience. We need to be at or above expectations. So I want to ask you the last question of the day before you start asking me questions, but we've got about 10 minutes to go through before I do that. Again, the chat box. If we need to hire a top tier workforce to help us overcome challenges and seize opportunities, what 4 key characteristics do we need to look for? So type that into the chat box and I'll give you a few minutes. What 4 key characteristics, and I'm talking about rank and file employee. One of the characteristics that I talked about for a leader role is the ability to make decisions with little or conflicting information. But this is a rank and file employee. What key characteristics do we need to look for? Abby, what do we have coming through here? I'm going to grab a glass of water.
Kim, I'll jump in and run with those if that's okay. There's some nice comments there. We've got independent, proactive, adaptable, out-of-the-box thinking, soft skills. Another attendee's gone initiative, flexibility, customer focus, values driven, self-direction. There's some comments around resilience and customer focus. Initiative again pops up. Lead with minimum information, which is again initiative. Some comments around culture and problem solving. Yes. Optimistic and adaptable. Diverse backgrounds, so that's good. So that's a very interesting comment. Someone's put a comment about risk taker, so I think that implies to adaptability.
Yes. People
and virtual management, looking forward, not back. Some very good comments. Thank you, everybody.
Excellent, excellent comments, guys. Yes, I have spent a lot of time thinking about this, and it was as a result of one of my clients. Actually, I was doing an executive roundtable, and I was talking about this model, and they said, "Okay, if good enough isn't good enough, what are the 4 key characteristics?" And I kind of shot out 4, and I've only changed 1. I stand by 3 of the. I can't even remember what the initial list was, but I have. Moved 1, but they've stood the test of the last 6 months, and this is what the research shows as well. The 4 key characteristics to the modern workforce, obviously, they have to be adaptable. I call that agility. They must be able to shift with the change, because change is the name of the game. The second is ability to learn. If we have a segment of the population who are or underemployed, and we have another segment of the population where we can't find enough people to fill those roles, then we need to be able to take these people on the journey. And it's not just once, it's a continuous iteration of this journey. So we need people who are able to learn. Resilience, absolutely. We need, my friend Jacqueline Nagel calls it foundational strength. We need not to be able to bounce back, but we need that foundational strength to be able to weather the storm and be anti-fragile. And then the 4th is a passion for excellence. Excellence in everything that we do. Excellence in customer experience, excellence in doing our jobs, excellence in everything. So thank you, guys. Okay, what I want to spend the last 5 to 10 minutes on is my top tips for how to hire and retain a disruption-proof workforce so that you're able to ride these waves and adopt that anti-fragile concept. And I lovingly call this the unified theory of everything people. This is literally a holistic model that will help you attract, engage, and retain the top talent, and will break down or disrupt every old school people practice that you might still be hanging on to. So let me explain. We start the unified theory of everything people, not with a laundry list of duties and responsibilities. We have to throw traditional job descriptions away. Traditional job descriptions are an old school paradigm based on the military checklists. Traditional job descriptions only work in a command and control environment, which the modern workforce will not put up with. Traditional job descriptions are good for compliance for a workforce that does routine, tactical, and predictable work, the antithesis of what we need from the modern workforce. So the very first thing that I would encourage you to do is throw away traditional job descriptions. Instead, write success profiles. Now, I didn't invent the success profile concept, far from it, but I did invent a framework to help you write success profiles. And I'm going to share that with you, or RSM is going to share that with you as part of the downloads after this presentation. So success profiles start with target-rich objectives, no duties and responsibilities, 5 or fewer outcomes that are measurable. They all have to have dates, times, percentages, or a tangible item, an outcome, and written in real language. This allows you to set the bar for your people and hold them accountable, and not be on this merry-go-round where you're having performance development conversations because they're trying to go through a traditional task-based job description. So the next thing that we need to do is we need to understand what strengths we need to hire for. Now, remember those 4 key characteristics? That's a subset of strengths. Strengths are innate abilities that cannot be taught. They can be improved, but they cannot be taught. Employees have to walk into the interview with them. So if we are looking for those 4 key characteristics, we need to be able to screen for those 4 key characteristics, as well as any other characteristics or innate abilities that will help them achieve those target-rich objectives. And we know that it's not just the ability to do the job that makes a great employee from a not so great employee. We also know that it's culture fit. But how do you define culture fit? Well, I spent 10 years, I was a recruitment consultant prior to starting Ignite Global in 2009. I spent 15 years as a recruitment consultant, and I did 5,000 interviews. That stat will come in handy in a minute. 5,000 interviews during my 15 years. And I started teaching hiring skills before I started this business. I started teaching hiring skills when I was first moved by a large multinational to Auckland. That's how I got to this part of the world. And I really did some deep thought into what constitutes culture fit. It's not how well we get along necessarily, but what I discovered is that it's actually a values alignment. So we need to understand what our values are and then screen candidates for those values to make sure that they are aligned. But how do we attract the right people? Well, it turns out, and this is interesting because it's even more prevalent post-COVID than pre-COVID. In order to attract the right person to our organization, we have to articulate a compelling purpose, but not just any purpose. A purpose that connects the individual employee through the team, through the company, to the customer or community at large. This is what an empowered workforce is looking for. They're looking for a purpose that they can get behind. They want to do meaningful work, especially post-COVID. A lot of us have reevaluated our priorities, and we have discovered that this is one of them. We want to work for a company that we can back. I like to think of purpose as being the magnet that attracts the right people, and values and strengths as the filter that filters out the wrong ones through that hiring funnel. So now that we have a human that is engaged with attracted to your purpose, that are aligned with your values, that have the right strengths to be able to achieve those target-rich objectives. What do we need to do? Well, we as leaders, and this is one of the best pieces of advice that I can give you. You want people to think for themselves. You want people to be solutions oriented. You want people to wow your clients, your customers. We need to be able to give them autonomy with accountability. Now, that accountability is those target-rich objectives. The autonomy, especially in a remote or hybrid workforce, the autonomy comes from setting and holding them accountable for those target-rich objectives. That will allow them to reach those TROs, as we affectionately call them. Then what you need to do is support and coach them if they struggle with them, and be their cheerleader if in fact they achieve them. The best way to accomplish employee engagement or to increase employee engagement is through monthly one-on-one structured conversations. The Harvard Business Review wrote up a article about 4.5 years ago that was the synopsis of a 10-year study from the Navalent Corporation, a large global management consulting company. And the title of the article was "What Great Executives Know and Do." And they said that great executives have 4 key characteristics. But the fourth, they said, was the most important and also translates to all levels of leader. And that is that they study and meet the needs of their critical stakeholders. Well, there's no critical stakeholder more important than your employees. So that is the unified theory of everything people. When you get the link to the downloads, you'll get a white paper, an insights paper on how to create an entire spot-on job description, which will help you put together TROs, target-rich objectives. And if you need help putting together a purpose, values, there are some tips in there for that, as well as the strengths that you might need to hire somebody and to retain somebody that can successfully achieve those target-rich objectives. So, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to open up for questions. If you have to jump off but have a burning question, feel free to reach out to me. Happy to answer anything offline. And please do link in with me, just Kim Seeling Smith. So, Phil, do we have some questions?
Oh, you've got some doozies.
Excellent. That's what I like to hear.
It's funny, the first two kind of link, not directly, but I'd like to combine them, I think. You talked about the fact that CX is the key to thriving over the next decade. And then you went through the characteristics that we should be looking for in our client-facing roles. Yeah. I think you might have already answered this, but I was wondering if you can give us the top tips around what we need to do to effectively hire for these attributes.
Yeah.
But it dovetails into another question from Chris, who says, how does the ability to source offshore combined with the work from home environment marry with your theory that we'll run out of cognitive workers? I think the two go together.
Great question, Chris. So the short answer to the second question is, I don't know yet, but there is a caveat on that. So I talked about the Korn Ferry stats. Pre-COVID, Australia will have a deficit of 2.2 million people by 2030. Globally, McKinsey says that deficit will be, hold on to your seat, 85 million. 85 million with the right cognitive skills to fill the roles that are available. They also say that there is going to be 20 million unemployed. I think that's an older stat, so I think those numbers may adjust. There is no doubt that the ability, now that we've proven that we can work from anywhere, there is no doubt that the ability to work from anywhere, to work from home, to source global talent will help us with this. But we've got to remember that global talent is now being sourced from all over the world. So I suspect that it will continue to be highly competitive, but can't put my hand on my heart with any specific numbers. I'd like to answer the first part of the question then in terms of how to hire. So when I teach hiring managers to hire, oh, sorry. That happened to be Miles from RSM, and I didn't mute my phone. In fact, I put it on airplane mode. I don't know why it rang through. So how to hire. One of the things that we need to do is we need to, Hudson Recruitment published a survey a few years ago that said that 44% of their hiring managers that they surveyed were not happy with their last hire. And it's because we don't think thoroughly enough about how to hire. We have to test for these traits, test for values and test for strengths. How do we test to make sure that they are the right people? And that's a combination of asking 80% behavioral, or what I call evidence-based questions, 20% situational questions, and then triangulating that data with additional data that you gather. What does the reference check say? Putting them through on-the-job simulations, potentially some profiling that you can do. So it's a combination of collecting the data, but the first thing that you need to do is understand what you're hiring for. That starts with the target-rich objectives, and then what strengths do you need to successfully achieve those? Next question, Phil.
Okay, again, I'm going to try and kill two birds with one stone. We've talked about the importance of the characteristics that an employee should have and how we go about hiring them. And I keep going back to the RSM experience, and fortunately we've done pretty well with this, but for me, the big trick is actually retaining staff or retaining our talent. And I call it this fight for talent. There are a lot of people who will want to employ our good staff. Yeah. And we somehow have to work out a strategy of retaining them. And so what do we do? So the first part of the question is, what tips have you got for the leaders who are on this call or this seminar about how they retain their top staff? And the second part of that is, is there an issue for businesses that rely on building rapport with their clients in their overall strategy development? How do you see the working from home environment impacting on these relationships? So we've got very good staff on one hand. We've got businesses who are trying to build rapport with their clients through an employee-based strategy. How is that impacted by the work from home environment possibly?
Yeah, I'll answer that first. That's a really interesting question. Some dear friends of mine are sales trainers, and they are working on exactly this. They're based in Victoria, regional Victoria, and many of their clients are larger companies in Melbourne, and they're faced with that. This is a relationship building business. The way that they went about building relationships was to go visit their clients. They can no longer do that. So I would say that these are real challenges. The remote environment are real challenges. The answer is not go back to the way things were. The answer is, how do we solve these challenges given our new paradigm? So one of the things, I am a huge fan of human-centered design, which means to get your employees together and potentially even some of your customers, and use multiple heads to work out that challenge. So I don't know the answer to that question overtly. What I do know is that there's somebody probably within your organization, or at least a group of people, that if we work together to solve that problem, we could do that. The first part of that question was around retention. I like to say that if you shouldn't worry about other companies trying to poach your staff if you do what you need to do to make sure that they don't want to go anywhere. Now, there is a superficial reason that people will tell you they leave, and there is a much deeper reason that people tell you they leave. The superficial reason is, got offered a job with more money or closer to home or better work environment. As a recruiter, we talk about push reasons and pull reasons for changing jobs. The push reason is what's not working about this job now that will make me look at this other opportunity. As employers, this is what we have to work on. We have to work on the push reasons. The best mechanism in the world, now I'm tripping over my tongue, is those structured monthly one-to-one conversations. I'm personally going to be doing more on the one-to-one conversations. I'm going to be hosting a free webinar. It's not a plug because it's a free webinar. If you link in with me, you'll get notice of this webinar where I'm going to unpack a model that I call the 9 currencies of choice, which forms a foundation for what to talk about. Because in those monthly structured one-on-ones, you need to address the needs of the organization and the needs of the individual. And you need to address all of their needs. Now, I put together this model that I call the currencies of choice. After I left recruitment and started Ignite Global, I unpacked my 5,000, what I call exit interviews, because 5,000 people walked into my office to tell me why they wanted to leave their employer, why they wanted to leave their manager. So monthly one-on-ones, if you do nothing else, do monthly structured one-on-ones to get to know your employees, understand what makes them tick, and then meet those expectations or manage their expectations if you can't, because we cannot be all things to all people. Phil, did I answer? I think that was a 3-part question, and I'm not sure I answered all 3 parts. I counted 2. Did I answer everything?
Look, I'm pretty happy with that because I'd like to move on to another question which has come up in the box.
Great.
I think as leaders, we get the importance of customer experience and the employee experience and how those two go together. But the question is, how do you convey that thought process and that leap in appreciation of the importance of the customer experience to the employee themselves? All right, so it's not good enough that an employee keeps a customer satisfied. And my view is, and the view of the questioner, the person who raised the question was, employees sometimes think that keeping a customer satisfied is and they've done their job. How do we get employees to actually reach the decision or reach the conclusion or come to the realization that they have to exceed the customer's expectations? Because that's what real customer experience is all about. So it's communication.
You hire for it. You hire for it. Even if they don't have experience doing that, you need to understand that they have those strengths or those innate abilities. You need to understand that that is something that they're passionate about. They're passionate about exceeding expectations. If you have a customer service or a sales force, or even people that just deal with customers in the accounts department that don't have that, you might be able to train it, but only if they do have that as a hidden strength or an unrealized strength. If it's an unrealized strength, you can bring it out. But if it's a weakness, you cannot bring it out. If somebody doesn't come to the table with a passion for exceeding expectations, very difficult to train for it. What else? What other questions do we have?
I don't have any more questions, and I don't think, as I'm just quickly checking the question box now, that we have got any more. So I'm not going to take up any more of your time, Kim. You've worked very hard for the last 45 minutes. So we really appreciate it, RSM, your contribution for us and your time today. I think the attendees would fairly say that they got a nice and very valuable presentation from you today. And I've certainly taken away a lot from it that we can use in our business. So I think that will go on. Invite all the attendees. I will invite them again, as you did, to link with you on LinkedIn for access to resources that you referred to today, but weren't able to use because of the time limitations and probably the scope limitations that RSM put on your presentation today. So invite everybody to go and look at those. A quick reminder that we will send a recording of today's session, materials on Friday. We'll distribute those to all the people who attended today's seminar and those who maybe weren't able to join us for reasons that, of course, sometimes things pop up and we don't have any control of that. So Friday you'll get the materials. And just a reminder that this is the first session in a 4-part series. So those of you who might not have registered for the 2nd, 3rd and 4th presentations in this seminar series, please feel free to. If today is any indication of what you're going to get, it will certainly be very valuable. Kim, thank you again very much for today's presentation.
Thank you, Phil, and thank you, participants.
Okay, Appreciate that. Thank you very much.